Hey, today's Daily Ticker brought to you by Pelican Brewing's Bad Santa Cascadian Dark Ale. Warm up with bold flavor, get into the holiday spirit, enjoy by the fire or maybe even under the mistletoe.
Ho, ho, ho.
Joining us now is Pelican born and raised columnist at the Oregonian, Bill Oram, one of our good buddies, at Bill Oram on Twitter. Go give him a follow. Bill, you were in Indianapolis this weekend. Did it feel mighty different watching Oregon win a Big Ten championship?
It was mighty colder than it was when I was there in July for the Big Ten media days. But no, I mean it felt like a milestone event for the Ducks, and I thought you could see that in the way Dan Lanning kind of was soaking it all in. He was on the field, wiping away tears, kind of from the weight of the moment. Winning a championship on their journey with the goal of another championship, I thought was really meaningful. That hasn't happened in Dan Lanning's tenure. I mean, they lost the Pac-12 championship last year, didn't get there 2 years ago. They've played a couple of meaningless bowl games in Dan Lanning's tenure. So this was sort of, I think, a realization of this kind of path that they are on with the goal of a national championship. And, I thought it was a cool moment for those players to kind of have the opportunity to celebrate. And, one of my, I guess I would say, pet peeves with Dan Lanning this year has been his sort of stubbornness about celebrating, right? Like, I mean, we see it internally, but when it comes time to talk about it, his attitude has been, we will celebrate. We can celebrate when the season's over. You don't finish your meal when it's half over. And my attitude has always been, it's the journey, not the destination. Hopefully it's the destination too, but you got to appreciate the journey along the way. And Dan has really refused to let that part of him be seen. And I thought it was cool to see it on Saturday. And I wanted to walk up to him and say, "Gotcha, you're crying. That means that you're celebrating and you think this is cool." But I let him just have the moment.
I read your article. You have a couple out there at Oregon Live. The one that you had after, the post-game stuff and they win the Big Ten title. And basically to a certain degree, it's like, this is for a national championship. They're playing to win the first one in Oregon Duck history. I know Lanning won't outright say that, but we all kind of know that's where he leans when he answers questions. You asked him one of those in the postgame. After those, seeing the path, Ohio State, Tennessee, and then potentially, a Texas, and then potentially a Georgia, is it really a disappointment for Oregon if they don't win a national championship, given the path that's kind of in front of them that they were given as a 1 seed? Meanwhile, the team they beat was given SMU and Boise State to the semifinal?
I do think it is, because you are the number one team in the country. You are the undisputed number one team in the country. You have you've won every game in front of you. You are 13-0. Yes, the path stinks, but you should still be favored in any one of those games. You still are the alpha of this college football landscape right now. So yes, those are all tough games. It is a tough path. I worry about the accumulation of all three of those, but this is as we said, for a national championship. And so, I think you get to I think at any point, you will see if the Ducks do lose any of those three in any of those three rounds, it will be the end of of an undefeated season, and their season would end with at 13-1, 14-1, or 15-1, and that is painstakingly close. And this team has shown that it is good enough. It has passed the tests that it needs to pass to tell you that it is good enough to actually do it. So I do think that it is still championship or bust, even though I have my frustrations with the setup of the CFP. Do not get me wrong. That said, I don't know that I'm convinced that Ohio State is going to beat Tennessee. I'm not convinced that Georgia is going to beat Notre Dame. I think Texas is going to beat Arizona State. But there are people who are smarter than me who are picking the Sun Devils. So you are at a point in the season where all these teams are really good. And as much as we want to talk about, this being a true tournament for the first time, weird things happen in tournaments. That's what we love about March Madness, is that there are upsets. So I do think that there is potential for what we consider to be the absolute, in soccer, you'd call it the group of death, in terms of the path to the championship. I do think we kind of need to see what happens. I don't think that the committee did the Ducks any favors, and I of course think that, hey, you're the number one overall seed. This should set up at least somewhat favorably for you. But also, the Ducks are trying to be a team that doesn't need any favors. And if they do it, which I recognize is a high bar, but still what I think the expectation needs to be, they will be the most deserving national champion in the history of the sport.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of Duck fans make that point today.
And I think I think that's something to hang on to.
Yeah, there's never been a team maybe with a tougher path, and if you get through it and you survive doing it, that's a hell of a thing to hang your hat on. Bill Oram is our guest, columnist of the Oregonian. Great pieces up right now, OregonLive.com. At Bill Oram, you can go follow him on Blue Sky as well. I'm curious to ask you, Bill, because you were there in Indianapolis. We've been so used to Vegas kind of being the host recently for Pac-12 championship games, and that's a great venue that's, regional for the fan bases that go, and the atmosphere last year seemed incredible between the Washington and Oregon game. What was the atmosphere like? How many Oregon fans were there? It felt like it was overwhelming. Penn State fans? Just kind of paint that picture for me as somebody who watched on TV.
Yeah, I definitely thought there was an edge to the Penn State crowd, just easier, and regionally they have more people in that part of the world. But boy, I'll tell you, by the time it was over and the Oregon fans had all sort of made their way down to the section in front of the stage where the trophies were given out, it was a great environment, man. There were still thousands and thousands and thousands of Duck fans who were there cheering, celebrating, chanting, singing the fight song along with the marching band. It was really cool when it was all over and kind of during that celebration. It was not like, it didn't feel like an underwhelming amount of people. It was, there were Duck fans, kind of all over downtown Indianapolis, as we've seen sort of on some of these other road trips this year. Indianapolis is not Vegas. It's a lot harder for people to hide or disappear. So if people are out, you're going to see them. And I saw Duck fans everywhere. I did end up at a Penn State themed late night dining establishment on Friday, and was surrounded by the Penn State crowd. But for the most part, I thought Oregon fans turned out really well. I will say I got on that one direct flight they added to Indianapolis on Friday morning because Delta added some travel hijinks to my day, and I was surprised that flight wasn't full. So I think that there was probably a little bit less of a crowd than there would have been if it was regional. And I will say, if I'm the Big Ten, I do not understand continuing to have the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis through 2027. I understand there's a great relationship there. Indianapolis is a great convention town that can accommodate a lot of people, but you are now a coast-to-coast conference that made this big swing to go get 4 schools from the West Coast. I don't know why you wouldn't lean into that and have the Big Ten championship game at SoFi or use Vegas. To me, it seems like a miss to kind of during this initial wave of interest in having West Coast schools continue to do everything in Indianapolis. Yeah. If I was the commissioner of the Big Ten for a day, that would change.
Bill, a lot of people speculated what would happen if Oregon won, being the 1 seed overall, but how the bracket would unfold. I'm curious your thoughts, not that you're surprised by what Oregon has in front of them, but just how the committee maybe didn't take into consideration that when you're talking about the non-conference champion teams, the Penn States, the SMUs, the Tennessees, the Ohio States, how they don't maybe change that the thinking and the formula to who plays who. Like Penn State losing the Big Ten title game gets SMU and then Boise State. I don't know how logically you sit in a room and say Oregon gets Tennessee, Ohio State, and then potentially a Texas or even an ASU. I don't know how you don't conclude that that's kind of unfair. What were your overall thoughts of the committee in year one with the bracket and how they maybe didn't take into consideration rewarding a team like Oregon who went 13-0?
Well, I think the thing that they failed to understand or failed to anticipate was how much crowning or giving those buys to conference champions was going to skew and sort of scramble the rest of the bracket. And in a year when the Big 12 champion is an actual 12-1 national championship contender, top 5 team, and same in the ACC. Maybe that makes sense, but what they were trying to avoid, I think, we've seen such a things being so heavily weighted toward the SEC. I think they were trying to avoid that. But what you ended up doing in this year is actually giving a great path for a lot of SEC teams and they tried to seed it like a bracket, but then once they got through the seeding, they tried to turn it into a ranking, and that doesn't work. There's a reason when you have an NCAA tournament bracket, you can look at it and say, hey, the team that's number 10 in this bracket is better than the team that I'd say is even number 6 or number 7. It's because a seeding is not necessarily reflective of a ranking. You're trying to create good games in the middle, and then maybe a little bit lighter on the edges, so that the team that is number 1 does have not a clearer path, but doesn't have you don't set it up so that number 1 is going to potentially lose in the first round unless you put a juggernaut like Maryland, Baltimore County in there. So it's just not supposed to be that way. And I think that they got in their own way of what a bracket looks like versus what a ranking looks like. And I do think that if they're going to stick with this system, they're going to do away with the conference champions getting the buys, or maybe you reseed after the first round games. If they were to reseed after the first round games, then Oregon would play the number 8 team of the remaining field. That would make a lot more sense than them playing the number 8 potentially now, which would be Ohio State. If you reseed, the number 8 could be SMU, or even Penn State or something like that. But it wouldn't be a team that was number 2 or number 3 basically the entire year in all the rankings.
Yeah, I see some Duck fans too bring up a good point that they're going to at least have a little runway here to buy those tickets for the Rose Bowl, where that should be a great home crowd for them. West Coast venue, traditional venue that who doesn't love going to L.A. for New Year's Day, and that the winner of the Ohio State-Tennessee game is only going to have about 10 days to figure out if we're going to go and do we want to go. How much is Bill Oram looking forward to spending New Year's Day in some sunshine in California?
Always looking forward to it. Seeing my friends back in L.A. As folks know, I lived there for 10 years. So, Los Angeles is near and dear to my heart. I think that everyone who can should try to get out of the gray and the rain for at least a few days in the winter, just to help bridge the gap to spring here in Portland. Mm-hmm. So I always appreciate those opportunities. And I just to the point about obviously yes, there's a chance for fans to buy tickets, get excited for this game, but I do think that there is a huge advantage for the Ducks going into the Rose Bowl over the opponent that they end up having. You can obviously make the case that there's a better chance for sort of a hangover from being off for that long. But I think I think it's more advantageous to have these 3 weeks to get healthy, to game plan. You're going to be playing one of 2 teams. They're going to have they're going to have 3 weeks to develop really sophisticated scouts on both potential opponents. If you're Ohio State, you're locked in on Tennessee until you get to December 22nd, and then it's a pivot to Oregon. And same if it's Tennessee who wins that game. And like I said, I'm not convinced Ohio State wins that game. Ohio State is kind of in disarray right now, and even to the fact that on the selection show yesterday that Kirk Herbstreit had to make the point that Ohio State would have been better off going on the road because fans there will be too busy booing Ryan Day. So I do think that Ohio State might just be a team that gets in its own way, and then you see Tennessee at the Rose Bowl. And not to say that is a more favorable matchup for the Ducks. It isn't. That is a team that is also super stacked. But I just think the Ducks have the built-in advantage here of these 3 weeks off. I don't know that bye is a better advantage than playing potentially SMU and Boise State, to your point, but it is an advantage that I think that they should take full advantage of, and I think does help them for the gauntlet that awaits.
Yeah, great stuff. Bill Oram, go check out his work at OregonLive.com. You can read him in the Oregonian. You can follow him on Twitter at Bill Oram. Go catch him on Blue Sky as well, the columnist for the Oregonian and a good friend here of the program. Bill, thanks for the time this morning, man. Glad you made it back from Indy, and we'll do this again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me, fellas.
There you go. Bill Oram of the Oregonian talking about the pathway for the Ducks. What does Dan Lanning make of the pathway for the Oregon Ducks? We can talk a little bit about that. Coming up next, is it harder? Did they get punished for getting the number 1 overall seed in the college football playoff? Today's Daily Ticker brought to you by Pelican Brewing Company. This year, give Santa what he wants. Forget the milk, Paris cookies with Northwest's favorite festive beer, Bad Santa Cascadian Dark Ale.